Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to you. This is another episode of Encounter. We have with us today a very special guest in the name of Shubha Vilas. He's an author, he's a storyteller, he's a spiritual coach, and works a lot with the world of corporate. Shubha Vilas, thank you very much for being with us in the studios of the NBC.
Very happy to be here with you, Roshan.
First and foremost, when I link all the things that you do, there's the common denominator of storytelling that links all the dots. Is it something that you've always had in your life?
That's a nice question. I guess my life has been centered around stories. From my childhood, I've been hearing stories from my grandmother. Probably my greatest treasures of memories of my childhood have been the bedtime stories that I heard from my grandmother. And then when I grew up in my younger days, I would read novels. And then as I grew up a little more, I started reading the scriptures, the epics, like the Ramayana, the Mahabharata. And I found everywhere there's a common factor, which is stories. And that's what has touched my heart the most. And I realized that if I need to inspire people, stories is the best medium to inspire.
And you've written a few books. You've written on Ramayana, The Game of Life, The Chronicles of Hanuman, and you've also written Open-Eyed Meditation, which is your latest book and which is also a big hit. Does it also revolve around storytelling? Because you have studied for many years the ancient scriptures, and I have a feeling that you mix it with modern day life to present a better package and to reach people in a better way.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm trying to do. I'm actually trying to present the ancient stories with practical wisdom that can be applied today. And I find most amazingly that practically every story of the past has a relevance in the present.
Tell us a bit more about Ramayana, The Game of Life. I'm not saying, don't tell us what's in the book, but what I want to touch here is, what was the inspiration behind the book?
Many years back, I used to teach in a school where I would share a lot of my thoughts with the kids. And one time I just happened to walk into the library of the school, and I found the whole shelves filled with so many novels and so many books. But I realized that the kids are not really getting access to the stories like the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, because these books that have been written in the past have been written in a language that a young adult, youngster who is reading books like the Harry Potter and things like that, at the pace of those books, there's nothing like that in the shelves. And I realized, rather than blaming the world, rather than saying that why the children are reading these kind of books, I realized that I want to contribute by creating such books. And that was my whole thought process behind creating the Ramayana, the Game of Life series, where I wanted every youngster to connect with the stories of the Ramayana and find them to be exciting, thrilling, adventurous, everything they can look for in a modern novel. But along with that, along with the entertainment, there should be an education element. This is what I call as edutainment books.
I've heard this term before. and tell us a few words about Open-Eyed Meditation, which is a very strange title, because meditation, most people say it's when your eyes are closed, but you come up with a different concept. With Open-Eyed Meditation, it's I would say it's a bit confusing.
Yeah, the whole concept behind open-eyed meditations stems from a term in Sanskrit called as Shastra Chakshu. Shastra means scriptures and Chakshu means vision. It essentially means seeing the world through the vision of the scriptures, through the lenses of the scriptures. So what I have done in open-eyed meditations is, it has a series of about 64 articles, each of which looks at one aspect of life through the stories of the Ramayana and Mahabharata. So essentially what I have done is, I have seen the world, meditating on different aspects of life, keeping my eyes open, but relating everything that I see with the wisdom of the past.
I have to ask you, this kind of work must have taken a lot of time. So how long ago did you start? What was the trigger that began it all for you?
I started studying about 20 years back, when I was probably 17. And the whole trigger behind me getting into studying all these ancient scriptures is that um, I realized that there is a lot of wealth hidden in these scriptures, which needs to be decoded. And for me to really show this wealth to the world, I felt I need to study it very deeply first.
I should point out that you have studied something else in college, and you're a law student.
I did my engineering in electronics and telecommunication, then I did law, specializing in patent law.
But that's a massive jump from what you were doing to trying to decode the messages in ancient scriptures. How does that happen?
What I tell people is that when people ask me, how did I shift from first engineering to law and then from law to spirituality, I tell people that I use the logical intelligence that engineering gave me and the analytical abilities that law gave me to study the scriptures and present it in a logically analytical way.
Hence, you being the author of so many books.
I guess.
What is the objective going forward with you sharing your message with everyone?
My objective is that I want to show the world that we have a lot of wisdom hidden in the ancient texts. And I want to show the world that today, rather than depending on self-help books which are generated based on modern thinking, modern thought process, which apparently is not really working because the world is going through intense struggle in terms of relationships, in terms of people's ethics being questionable, and so many aspects of life that are really kind of shaking today. In this context, I felt that the ancient scriptures have a lot of deep wisdom which is waiting to be explored. And my whole attempt now is to create a whole series of books which is going to be centered around the scriptures, but again, relating to a modern life today. I'm just in the process of writing a book which is called as 5.5 Ways to Stay in Love.
5.5?
Ways to stay in love.
How's a halfway in love?
That you'll have to read and explore.
I can get the 5, how's the half?
So these are based on 6 love stories based on our scriptures.
Fantastic.
But each love story brings one solid message and concept of how to stay in love. Everyone knows how to fall in love, but staying is very difficult. And therefore, that's my whole attempt now.
So basically, you come up with what you think are the solutions, and then you bring the stories to those solutions?
I guess the stories have those solutions. I'm just decoding the solutions from the stories.
Wow. And you decode the stories from ancient scriptures.
Yes.
So you mean to say that for every situation that we face now, in this modern age, the solution existed before in our ancient scriptures from thousands of years before?
Exactly.
So it's nothing new. We're just rediscovering what was already discovered.
Yeah. Actually, what I find is that though the trends of the world may change, though the fashion may change, though externally everything is changing, but the principles remain same. And what these stories talk about and what these scriptures talk about is principles. So I find that those principles are very much relevant today as much as it was in the past. The only thing is that so far we have seen that the packaging has been something that has made these books inaccessible to the world. I'm working on the packaging.
All right, so that it's more presentable and more appealing to people. I'm pretty sure, especially to the younger generation.
Exactly. Yeah.
And Shubha Vilas, you're a man serving society. I would say serving the world. It doesn't happen to many people. How did it happen to you?
When I was working in the corporate world, I was working in an international law firm, earning and doing pretty well in my career. Probably patent law is one of the most highly paid law professions. But at that point of time, I realized that I derive greater joy in giving than in taking. And then I was looking for how will I really be able to give society in the most tangible and the most substantial way. And that's when I realized this whole aspect of sharing knowledge would be the best way to serve society. Because in my opinion, the greatest hunger is not the hunger of the belly, is the hunger of the heart. People want to know. People need hope in life. And anyone who can help them gain knowledge and gain hope in life, they are eternally grateful to.
You speak a lot about helping others, giving out, giving to society. According to you, what is the most fundamental obstacle in society nowadays? You probably must have identified a few for you to be able to have this passion to give back and somehow try to, I wouldn't say make up, but try to help solve the various obstacles in society.
In my understanding, life in one word is about sacrifice. The greatest problem in society today is that people are living a very selfish life. People are living a life just for themselves. And there is no desire to sacrifice for the sake of others at all levels, whether it is at the governmental levels, or the political leadership, whether it is at the level of corporate leadership, whether it is at the level of the family also.
You have to be yourself fine to be able to help others. That's the general way of thinking.
That's right. That's right. But the reality is that the way the world is created, it is created for interdependence. I give you so that, and you give me. I have my strengths and I have my weaknesses. You have your strengths and you have your weaknesses. The world is created in such a way that we can be interdependent on each other. Unfortunately, people are trying to change the way the world functions and looking at creating the society in such a way that they get everything. That means they want to create a dependent society. That means they want to take one-way traffic, basically.
So without any effort?
Without any effort of giving.
So is that a thing that modern society has accustomed society to get used to, as in people who want to get in power is like, put me into power and I will give you this and that. Is that a major issue according to you?
Most people promise many things, but they seldom do. When they get into powers and they promise, they're saying that they will give so much back, but actually they end up taking so much from society.
So in a way, it's the society who's gotten used to people doing things or expecting people to do things for them.
As I said, it's a give and take. But the question
that would be
is
an
how
ideal
much?
world for in a give and take.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it is not the case.
Unfortunately, it's not. The Mahabharata gives an example of somebody who steals honey. Generally, they are huge honey farms where honey is grown, stored, and then there are farmers who hire people to distill this honey. And these people who distill the honey, they collect it in pots. And now while collecting in pots, their hands are filled with honey, right? So when you lick those hands, that's fine. That's allowed.
Okay.
But if you decide to carry one of the pots, that's not allowed. So when you get positions of leadership, you may get some fringe benefits out of it. You can lick that honey which is there in your hand as a result of taking so much pain of being a leader. But if you decide to take one of the pots away, that's not allowed. And that's what is happening in society today.
You did mention just now, we're in a society where you believe interdependence is of essence. And one can give, the other one can receive. But doesn't that create expectations, which is probably one of the reasons of many problems nowadays?
Definitely. The problem is not in having expectations, but the problem is in having expectations which are far away from the realities of life. The greater the gap between expectation and realities, the more miserable a person is. And therefore, we have to have expectations, but have natural expectations, not to have unnatural expectations which are impractical to be fulfilled.
Can you care to define what's natural expectations?
Like, for example, when people look at television ads, that those ads build up a certain amount of expectation in a person. Like for example, you're looking at an ad of cream, you know, a young girl who's looking at that ad. As soon as she looks at that ad and the beautiful girl who is being modeled in that ad, immediately the expectation that she starts developing is, I want to be as beautiful as her. And then she buys the product and then keeps looking at the mirror, hoping for some change. And then the reality is too obvious. And that reality creates a stress because the expectation has been so high, the build-up of the expectation has been so high, but the reality is so low. And that gap creates greater misery. And therefore, what we need to do is have expectations, but have expectations that are very close to the realities of life.
How about having spiritual growth in terms of expectations?
The difference between material expectations and spiritual expectations is that in material expectations, what we're talking about, there is growth on an external level. But in spiritual expectations, the whole purpose of growth is on an internal level. Growth should lead you to satisfaction. Growth should lead you to contentment. Growth should lead you to developing qualities which are beautiful from inside. And that growth is much more tangible than a growth which is based on external expectations.
One of the topics that you have often talked about, it has a lot to do with successful relationships. I'm going to go one step further and try ask you, you think there's a lot of unsuccessful relationships in the world?
You look at the number of divorce cases that are happening in the world today, and you'll understand how unsuccessful relationships are. You look at the concepts of live-in relationships that are coming up and propping up today, you'll understand that people are just completely fed up of the society of marriage because they just feel it just doesn't work. And therefore, they want to come up with an arrangement where it doesn't matter if the relationship breaks or no, because the pain is not going to be so much, because the expectation of the relationship is hardly anything. You know. So when you look at all these arrangements that are coming up today, we realize that somewhere there's a struggle. And people are really not able to understand what is the formula that works.
And where do you think the problem lies?
Most people do not...
Do you think it's at a younger generation, people are growing up, or it's something that has been here for ages? It's just we are more conscious about it now.
One of the things that I often see in relationships is that people do not prepare themselves before entering into a relationship. Like for example, when you are going for an interview, a job interview, you prepare yourself a lot. When you are trying to get an entry into a university or a college that is very, very high end, you're preparing yourself a lot. So whenever you're trying to get into something big or important, you focus and prepare a lot. But whenever you're getting into a relationship, who prepares? In fact, everyone just assumes that we're prepared for relationships. It doesn't work like that. In my understanding, as much as preparation is needed to get into a job, that much preparation is needed to get into a relationship. And that preparation on a mental level is what I call as good attitude. And therefore, today relationships are struggling so much because people have focused on developing their talents, but they haven't focused on developing their attitudes. And therefore, they may be highly successful in their jobs, they may be highly successful in their external aspects of life. But as far as relationships are concerned, and as far as their own internal aspects of life is concerned, there is a lot of struggle today.
Do you think there's a problem on behalf of parents?
The responsibility of development of an individual, a child, lies in both hands, parents and teachers.
Of course.
Because a child spends on an average more time in the school than at home. And naturally, the teachers are supposed to develop the child in a way that they develop the right attitude also. Education is three things: knowledge, skills, and values. Today's education system expertises in giving knowledge and skills, but hardly focuses on values. In fact, values are considered to be one of the useless aspects of education, probably a waste of time. Therefore, if you look at the kind of attendance and the kind of importance, prioritization that is given to moral science classes or value education classes, is hardly anything. You know, the kids don't pay attention there, and the teachers are hardly bothered about imparting those values, because they just feel it's not a part of the syllabus, it's not a part of the mark system, and therefore it's not prioritized. But in my understanding, life is like an iceberg. 25% of the iceberg is above the water, but 75% of the iceberg is below the water. 25% of the iceberg is what we call as personality. When we look at personality development, it's about the way a person looks, the way a person dresses, the hairstyle, the ability to speak, the ability to communicate on an external level. All that is what we call as personality, and that's the kind of grooming that happens in education systems today. It tries to make you a very, very well-rounded, good personality. But 75% of the iceberg that is below the water is what is called character. And unfortunately, there is no emphasis on character development. There is no emphasis on developing deeper value systems to life. And therefore, when a storm comes, externally everything changes, people are shaking. Because unless there is a depth of internal strength, externally things will keep changing. How will you be able to be stable in an environment that is constantly changing?
What are the main factors that lead to good character building?
Good character building is founded on the principles of understanding one's connect with oneself and one's connect with God. Character building is about accountability. Who are you accountable to? Are you accountable to your own conscience, and are you accountable to God? Just like a surgeon who is operating someone on a operation table, whom is he accountable to? There's no one in the world who actually knows if he makes a mistake. So he's only accountable to his own conscience, and he's only accountable to God. A teacher who's teaching in a classroom, whom is she accountable to? She's not. Nobody will ever understand what she's teaching and how she's doing it. The only person she's accountable to is her own conscience and to God within her own heart. Similarly, development of character is all about developing one's own conscience and developing one's connect with God. Unfortunately, today, people have nothing called conscience alive. For most people, if they do something wrong or if they do something manipulative, exploitative, it doesn't even affect them because they haven't allowed their conscience to develop.
I think we all have a conscience. It's just most people are blinded with the curtain nowadays because there are so many factors coming into play. But it's still inside everyone.
It does exist, but it works in a very subtle way. Let me explain. Just like when a small child, when he decides to do something naughty for the first time, as soon as he tries to do something naughty, his heart starts beating.
And breathe
he
deeply.
really panics, So the first time he's doing something naughty, he's miserable, actually. But that heartbeat and that the signs that the body is giving is actually signs of the Paramatma, the God within us, giving us an indication this is wrong.
It causes a chemical imbalance also.
Exactly. So that means there is some system within us that is giving us warnings that you're doing something wrong. But this system that is within us has to be developed. That's when we actually start getting warnings whenever we do something wrong all our life. But unfortunately, when you decide to neglect this voice that is from within you, whether we call it intuition, whether we call it the Paramatma, whether we call it the conscience, whatever we call it, when we consciously decide to ignore that voice for the first time, the second time the voice is smaller. The third time the voice is even smaller. The fourth time it's much smaller. And by the time the fifth time it dies. You just can't, you don't get affected by it.
As in you don't hear it.
You don't hear it.
Yeah.
And also you find that the Paramatma, whatever the conscience within you, it realizes that there's no point in trying to help this person.
How do we, is it a bit how you come forward with your books and trying to inspire people to try and be better?
Everyone needs reminders. These reminders come in different ways. Sometimes the reminders come in the form of calamity. Sometimes the reminder comes in the form of the time factor, the age. And sometimes the reminder comes in the form of wisdom. Whichever way reminders come, those reminders are useful for us for self-growth.
There's a new kind of reminder coming in nowadays. It's called WhatsApp reminders.
Absolutely.
You wake up every morning, you have a couple of messages. Oh yeah, almost forgot that. But it has made me realize that we probably know most of these things. But as you said, it's very good to have a reminder so that it keeps your mind focused on the straight path ahead. And probably this is what you want to try achieve with the books and try to touch people.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I want to start talking about emotional intelligence, which is probably the next step after successful relationships and after character building, where it spans in all spheres of the life. But unfortunately, we will have to take a break for now because we have come to the end of this episode. So we'll have more discussion in the next episode.
Very happy being with you, Roshan. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to the end of this episode of Encounter. Thank you very much for your attention. Make sure not to miss the next episode.